How's it going, everybody? Session here. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV, and just kind of wanted to give an example of what my hotbar looks like on controller, and just to showcase kind of what the abilities look like and where they're placed, and pretty much just give like an emphasis on how to place abilities where for your hotbar. This is not like a prime example of like the best way to make it work. This is really more so for me, just kind of showcasing what my hotbar looks like and how comfortable I feel playing with it, and just for like fair warning as well. I play with controller and I have the double triggers activated for my ability, so I can go to my second hotbar. So just that way, you don't have to play like this way as well. Because I know some people do like R1 and they switch hotbars, which is the same thing as the ones you see there. And of course, the rest of the hotbars are there as well. So for me, of course, everyone has like the 1-2-3 combo for the tanks, right? So it's really easy to just kind of utilize 3 spots that let you work on that, and you're going to be using these abilities, of course, all the time. So I like that. Now, I know when Shadowbringers was around, we didn't obviously have Double Down, and we only had Burst Strike, and there was no continuation for Burst Strike. So I used to have Burst Strike where this Double Down is currently, but then after leveling up the class and actually getting into 90, I realized that, Burst Strike had a continuation, which was actually really cool to see, like, visually. And then when I got to level 90 and had the Double Down, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to put this move somewhere. And I originally put it up here along with Gnashing Fang and Burst Strike, just because I liked the placement for it. But then the weird part was when I couldn't find a place for that spot underneath Budo Shell and the 1-2-3 combo. I actually had no idea what to put there. So I had the revelation of like, oh, maybe I'll put like another Double Down there. Like, why not? I don't really lose anything for doing so. And that actually started to become like the trend, if you will, for this expansion, at least for me personally, is a lot of my abilities will repeat in spots just for the sake of comfort and simplicity, because it's really easy to just, like, in the middle of fighting a raid or something and you're mashing buttons or whatever that it is, right? You just have to press your buttons. I obviously want my same buttons to be used for Double Down, or any button that it is for that matter, so that way, like, no matter what happens, if I just press like the right trigger and the X or cross button, then I just use my Double Down, and I like that a lot, actually. So at least that's how it was for me, and I personally really enjoyed that. And then, like I said, I started noticing that trend a lot, where a lot of my skills would repeat in not in certain places, but just in a way that you'll see it for sure with like my summoner and my dancer. I have several abilities repeated just for the sake of like comfort, and I think that's the most important thing as well when you're playing this game, is to be able to make your hotbar have the efficiency to be comfortable. Because I feel like the more comfortable you get with where your hotbar placement is and you press your buttons, the more likely you'll be able to go into raids and do content without needing to think so much about like your button placement and like your attacks. You can just focus on the raid and like the mechanics that kind of follow suit, and then once you get comfortable, then of course the raid gets easier and it's a lot more fun. So I wanted to make sure I maximize that as much as possible. And similar to all the tanks that I have in my listing, all of my shared abilities, so like Rampart, Arm's Length, Potion, Interject, Shirk, Provoke, even Tank Stance, right? Those are all in the same place pretty much. So you're pretty much going to see like 6 or so abilities on this hotbar alone. They look the exact same. And Tank Stance, of course, obviously the icon is different, but the actual function of this button is the same. And even same thing with where Aurora is. It's kind of different though, because well, you'll see it with Dark Knight, but essentially any like HP recovery ability, if you will, is where Aurora is. So for Paladin, that's where Clemency is, and then for Warrior, that's where Equilibrium is. But then for Dark Knight, I have Abyssal Drain there, which is technically HP recovery, but like not technically, So we'll definitely dive into it for other classes, but I just wanted to showcase that that's where my hotbar is for all my tanks pretty much. And up here, it's actually very different, but the mitigation buttons for Rampart, Nebula, Camouflage, and Heart of Light those are the same, sorta, but it's kind of broken down in terms of like Rampart's in the same spot for all tanks. Heart of Light is the AoE mitigation tool for the tanks, if you will, and that's the same for all tanks in that theoretical. Nebula is the 30% mitigator, and that's the same for all tanks. And Camouflage is the one that's a little bit of like the black sheep, because it's not the same button for every tank. Like I have like my 25%er down here next to my invuln and my buff, right, and my 120 cooldown, but not every single tank has a mitigation button there. And like I said, you'll definitely see that further on as we kind of go through the list of all the tanks we have. So, but you know, strictly focusing on Gunbreaker, I personally have always liked being able to have like my gap closer and my, you know, range attack on the same button as well, just because that's how I had it for a majority of my jobs when I was playing. Whenever I played like a new class and there was a button that I can use where lightning shot is, anything that threw an attack, I just basically put it there until the class became defined. And then I started realizing where I can place my abilities, which was really cool. So, and I think the universal staple too is that lightning shot is basically the ranged attack for pulling, you know, mobs or bosses or whatever that it is, and that's how I usually just went about it. The circle and square button that were always very different between each other, and it's really different. So that's where that comfort comes into place as well. And I think, like, of course, with any hotbar development or example, as long as you place your buttons and just remember where your buttons are, it doesn't really matter where you put anything, because at that point, once you get used to it and comfortable with it, then it'll just kind of work itself out just in your brain, right? So I really enjoy being able to make that function the way that it does. So for me, at least, whenever I used like my burst strike or my gnashing fang, it's really easy to look at the timer while I'm in the middle of attacking the boss, and then once I realize that, you know, 30 seconds are about to come up and then I have to do my combo for gnashing fang, it's really easy to just sit up here with the double trigger button and do my gnashing fang combo. And of course, since this is something that requires like 2 GCDs or even 3 at some point, right? I like being able to have it up here in case I need to use my cooldowns for mitigation. There are, of course, some scenarios where I may need to be using Sonic or blasting or even my 1, 2, 3 and still come back up here to press my buttons. But the coincidence, at least for me, has always been while I'm either preparing like a burst strike or a gnashing combo of some sort, then I need to use a mitigation tool, and that's why I have it set up the way that I have up here, because it's just really easy to kind of weave 1 in or 2 out whilst doing all that stuff. So of course, since gnashing fang and continuation pair up so well together, as a GCD and OGCD, you know, you can technically fit another OGCD in there if you wanted to. So being able to do like gnashing into continuation and then doing like a rampart in between, like, it's comfortable to do that. I feel like if I personally had the gnashing combo like down here and my mitigation tools up here, then that would be a lot more like trigger tapping for me to be able to go up to the second hotbar just to activate it and come back down here. So that's why I specifically had it like this, and it's been like this truly since like Shadowbringers. And I'm hoping that when the new expansion comes out and they showcase some of the buttons and upcoming changes, that it can stay that way as well. I mean, I don't really have a theory in terms of what they're going to do, but I'd like to think that if Double Down gets a continuation, then that's going to be perfect for these 3 buttons to sit up here with the continuation. But I don't know though. Well, I mean, of course, we'll see what we get as we kind of dive further into the expansion when it comes out in like the next year or so. Now, of course, with my Gunbreaker, and you know, now that this is patch 6.3 and we're doing this a little later than usual, Paladin, of course, got that rework, and it has a lot of similar functionalities in terms of button presses and buffs and whatnot with Gunbreaker. So, you know, since No Mercy is my Gunbreaker damage up, right? Fighter Flight's in the same spot, just because they both function in the same manner that they are a button press to activate your buff. But of course, that's just different because of where buttons are placed in pretty much. So, like, you know, for me, having Bloodfest next to No Mercy is just perfect, because when I start the opener usually, then it's really easy for me to just kind of activate it both together, and then I just start going crazy, right? And that's always been like the best feeling. So I think I've always had these 2 buttons here next to each other as well, just because it's really easy to put those 2 together and not have to go somewhere else to activate it. It just also feels like it just feels right to put it there too. Like, I can't imagine putting like something like Sonic Break there. I don't really know how I basically picked that spot so quickly. It just instinctively happened. Because I think whenever I do a hotbar, like prep for any class that comes out, or even when the classes get updated, I like to be able to have everything in a similar spot. But of course, some classes will be different than others, and I think that's just something that kind of comes with the territory of playing like that class. So of course, one prime example of this with Gunbreaker in specificity as well is my AOE's, because you know, I have my hotbar completely packed with one ability in every spot except for one, right, which is double down. And with my AOE's, I couldn't find anywhere to put them, and I only put them, you know, here along with Bowshock. I was thinking about trying to move my mitigations down to the first hotbar, but I've had the mitigations on the second hotbar, I kid you not, like since Heaven's Ward to some degree, that I just really never saw that change of moving it to the first hotbar to be like a possibility, I would say. Because even when we had, oh my gosh, like back in the day when convalescence was a thing and awareness, all of those all those button presses were literally up here along with Rampart, and that was even before I was doing like double trigger. I used to have to hold R1 and swap to the hotbar to do that, but that's when I didn't know that I could double trigger to come up here and then press the button as well. But it did make it so much easier to be able to do that, because I like to also visually see everything as you see it on the hotbar. I don't I've seen some people have like an additional hotbar like on the side somewhere, or you know, like in the middle of the screen that shows like the cooldowns. I don't need to do that because I have it with the second hotbar. I used to want to consider that back when I used to hide the second hotbar, but I just really got comfortable with how it looks like now, and it works out for me perfectly too, just because like I said, the Gunbreaker class as a whole, I feel like everything that you can do content-wise with this class, it just plays so fluid and it's so comfortable, and especially when you can figure out all the buttons that you can place on the hotbar, playing it on a controller is really, really comfortable. Like, I like to be able to just sit in one spot like I am right now, and then just press as many buttons as possible without needing to move my, you know, my joystick around, just to be able to, you know, for the sake of mobility, like get out of the way of attacks, unless it's like required. And I think that's like what partially comes into place with it as well, is because I want to be able to use all of my attacks that are either like a you know, a damaging attack on a like face button and not like on a directional, because that way I can keep on doing damage, right? So that's kind of how I have it set up for Gunbreaker. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoy it, and hopefully it adds some kind of comfort to the class as a whole. You know, I mean, I'm also very curious to see what kind of other hotbars people have, and where they have their buttons placed. I'd be so curious. I don't know if I'd test it out per se, but I feel like I would wonder, like, if I have my buttons placed here, where would other people have theirs, you know? Because I don't look at other people's hotbars as an example. I figure it out for myself, so I don't know what other hotbars could possibly look like on a controller, even or KBM for that matter as well. But I'd be very curious to see what that looks like. I might have to like look up that in a little bit and just get like a understanding, because I usually don't share my hotbar like configuration with anybody either, so I feel like everyone has their own version. So I mean, like I said, I'd be very curious to see what that looks like. But let me know what you think. Honestly, like I said, I had a really fun time being able to change this hotbar around once we got the class level 90. And like currently, I just love how Gunbreaker feels and plays, which I think is why I chose to main it for the tier of Abyssos. And I think I like this class enough. I might even do it for the third tier. I was thinking about changing classes out, but I don't think that that's a possibility at this point, because I like this class like way too much. So hopefully you guys enjoy, and let me know what you guys think, and have a good day.